The sun in the Arizona Territory in 1881 did not simply shine. It judged. It bore down on the earth with the weight of a heavy iron skillet, searing the moisture from the air and the hope from the eyes of men who had traveled too far west. The heat was a physical thing, a dry, suffocating blanket that smelled of sagebrush and hot dust. In this part of the country, the law was often nothing more than a heavy revolver on a hip or a scrawled signature on a piece of paper that could be burned as easily as dried kindling. Nora Whitaker stepped off the stagecoach in the town of Ocotillo Flats. Her boots sank an inch into the powdered earth. She felt the eyes of the town upon her immediately. It was the sensation of walking into a room where an argument had just ended, a heavy, prickly silence. She was 27 years old, a woman traveling without a husband, a father, or a brother, and in the West. That made her a curiosity at best and a scandal at worst. She motioned to the driver to unload her trunk. It was a modest thing, leather-bound and scuffed from the long rail journey from the east. And then the bone-rattling stagecoach ride across the territory. But her most valuable possessions were not in the trunk. They were closer to her. Clutched in her gloved hand was a thick, leather-bound ledger, its corners bent from use and hidden deeper. Pinned securely inside the lining of her traveling jacket was a wax-sealed envelope. That envelope was the reason her heart hammered a rhythm against her ribs that had nothing to do with the heat. It contained the evidence of a theft so grand and so quiet that most of the territory had not yet realized it had happened. It proved that the water rights to the canyon spring, the lifeblood of this dusty basin, had been fraudulently altered in the county records. Nora adjusted her hat, shielding her pale eyes from the glare. She was not the same woman who had left Boston 3 months ago. That woman had been soft, shaped by tea parlors and the expectations of a society that viewed a broken engagement as a stain on a woman's soul. That Nora had been humiliated when Arthur had called off the wedding, citing her unsettling independence and his family's preference for a more pliable match. He had pushed her out of the comfortable, decent life she was expected to lead, leaving her with nothing but her education and a burning resolve. She had made a promise to herself as the train crossed the Mississippi River, no one would ever write the story of her life for her again. "Miss, you need help with that." The voice was gravelly. A man standing by the hitching post, chewing on a piece of straw, watched her with narrowed eyes. "I can manage, thank you," Nora said, her voice steady. She gripped the handle of her smaller valise. "Could you point me to the boarding house? I was told that Mistress Hollis runs a clean establishment." The man chuckled, a dry sound like boots on gravel. "May's place, down the street, past the saloon. Don't mind the noise. The railroad boys are paid today." The railroad. It was the beast eating its way across the territory, bringing steel and steam and men like Silas Creed. Nora walked down the main street. The town was a collection of raw lumber buildings that looked as if they had been nailed together in a hurry to catch the money flowing from the track layers. The air smelled of sawdust, manure, and cheap whiskey. As she passed the saloon, the doors swung open, and the raucous sound of a piano spilled out. 2 men stumbled out, laughing, but they stopped when they saw her. Their gazes raked over her dark traveling dress, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "Just keep walking," she told herself. "You are Nora Whitaker. You are a bookkeeper. You deal in facts, not fears." She reached the boarding house, a 2-story structure that had been painted a defiant white, though the desert dust had already stained the hem of the building a reddish brown. Inside, the air was cooler. May Hollis, a woman with arms like a blacksmith and a face that had seen every kind of trouble the frontier could offer, looked up from sweeping the floor. "Room?" May asked, not pausing in her sweeping. "For 1 night," Nora replied. "I have a seat on a buckboard heading to the county seat tomorrow morning. I have business with the federal judge." May stopped sweeping. She leaned on the broom and looked Nora up and down. "Business with the judge. A woman alone. Is that a crime in the territory? Mrs. Hollis." "May, just May. And no, it ain't a crime. Just foolish. But I suppose that's your affair. $1 for the room, 50 cents for supper. Payment in advance. Nora counted out the coins, $1.50. She tried to keep her hand from trembling. Her funds were dwindling. If she did not get this evidence to the judge and secure the reward for exposing the fraud, or at least a position assisting with the legal cleanup, she would be destitute in a land that did not forgive poverty. After settling into a small, clean room that smelled of lavender and starch, Nora sat on the edge of the bed. She took the envelope out from her jacket. The wax seal was unbroken. Inside were the original survey maps and the affidavits she had painstakingly gathered from illiterate ranchers who thought they were signing receipts for seed, not signing away their water rights. The spring in the canyon, known to the locals as Painted Rock Spring, was the only reliable water for 50 miles. The ranchers needed it. The town needed it. And the Apache. She had heard the Apache believe the water was the blood of the earth, something that could not be owned, bought, or sold. But the railroad company, and the speculators shadowing it, saw it differently. They saw a monopoly. They saw power. A knock on her door made her jump. She quickly shoved the envelope beneath her pillow. "Who is it?" "Gentleman to see you. Miss Whitaker." May's voice came through the wood. "Says he knows you from the station." Nora's stomach twisted. She knew no one here. She smoothed her skirt, checked her reflection in the small, cracked mirror, and opened the door. Downstairs, in the small parlor that served as the boarding house's sitting room, a man was waiting. He held a hat in his hands, turning it slowly by the brim. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than this entire building, the fabric gray and impeccably cut. His boots were polished to a shine that reflected the lamplight. He looked up as she descended the stairs. His face was handsome in a sharp, geometric way, like a landscape carved by wind. He smiled, and it was a perfect smile, too perfect. It did not reach his eyes, which were the color of slate. "Miss Whitaker," he said, his voice smooth like oil. "My name is Silas Creed. I represent the Arizona Pacific Expansion Company." Nora gripped the banister. "Mr. Creed, I do not believe we have business." "Oh, but I think we do," Creed said. He stepped closer, invading her personal space just enough to be intimidating, yet staying far enough back to maintain the veneer of a gentleman. "Word travels fast on the wire. Miss Whitaker, we heard a former bookkeeper from the land office in the East was asking difficult questions. We heard she was carrying cumbersome paperwork. I am a private citizen traveling on personal business," Nora said, channeling the coldest tone her mother had ever used on a servant. "The West is a dangerous place for a woman alone," Creed said softly. "Accidents happen. Coaches overturn. Baggage gets lost, especially baggage containing old ledgers and confusing maps." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "It would be a shame if you were to encounter hardship when a simple transaction could ensure your comfort. The company is prepared to offer you $500 for the contents of your trunk, to save you the burden of carrying it. $500. It was a fortune. It was enough to return to Boston and live independently for 2 years. It was enough to buy a small house. But Nora thought of the rancher she had met 3 days ago, a man with sun-bleached eyes who had wept when she explained what the paper he signed actually meant. She thought of the spring, a place she had only seen on maps, a blue vein in a harsh red world. "My trunk contains only clothes and personal effects. Mr. Creed." Nora lied, her chin lifting. "And my price is not negotiable because I have nothing to sell." Creed's smile remained fixed, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "A pity. Ideals are heavy things to carry in this heat. Miss Whitaker. They tend to dehydrate a person." He placed his hat on his head. "I will see you around. I am sure this is a small territory." When he left, the air in the room felt thinner. Nora realized her hands were shaking. She had just declared war on the most powerful force in the territory. The next morning, the sun rose like a bloody eye over the horizon. Nora secured passage not on the main stagecoach, which was delayed for repairs, but on a smaller buckboard wagon carrying supplies to the county seat. The driver was a man named Miller, who chewed tobacco and spat with alarming accuracy at passing lizards. They rolled out of town just after 6 o'clock. The town of Ocotillo Flats faded behind them, a scar on the vast, indifferent skin of the desert. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, the landscape shifted. The flat scrublands gave way to rising mesas and jagged rock formations that looked like the teeth of ancient beasts. This was the Apache land, or at least it had been before the treaties and the lines drawn on maps in Washington. High above the trail, on a ridge of red sandstone that overlooked the winding road, a figure remained perfectly still. He blended into the stone so effectively that a casual observer would have mistaken him for a shadow cast by the morning sun. He was Apache. His hair was black and coarse, held back by a strip of cloth. He wore moccasins that made no sound and a shirt of faded calico. His name was Kohana, though the soldiers at the fort called him Kai. He was not hunting today. Not for game. He was watching. He saw the dust cloud of the buckboard long before he heard the wheels grinding against the rocks. He saw the driver, a man whose spirit was as murky as a stagnant pond. And he saw the woman. Even from this distance, Kohana could see she did not belong here. She sat stiffly, gripping the seat, her pale dress standing out like a beacon against the reds and browns of the earth. She looked fragile, like the paper flowers the white women sometimes brought with them that crumbled in the dry wind. But his eyes, sharp enough to count the feathers on a hawk at 300 yards, noticed something else. She was not looking back at the town. She was looking forward to it. Her jaw was set. Kohana shifted his weight. The wind brought him the scent of rain from miles away, a ghost of a storm that might never touch the ground. He felt a prickle on the back of his neck, the instinct that had kept him alive through 30 years of skirmishes with the blue-coat soldiers and the encroaching settlers. He looked down at the pass ahead. It was a narrow throat of rock, the perfect place for an ambush. He knew that Silas Creed had men in these hills. He knew that the water in the canyon was the prize they sought. He did not know what the woman carried, but he knew that anything Creed wanted was something that should be kept from him. The Apache warrior did not move to intercept. Not yet. He simply watched, a silent guardian of a land that was being stolen acre by acre. He felt a strange curiosity about the woman. Why would she come to this place where death waited under every rock? The buckboard rattled on for hours. The heat grew intense, shimmering off the ground in waves that made the horizon dance. Nora drank tepid water from her canteen, rationing it carefully. "How much farther to the station?" she asked Miller. "Another hour, maybe 2. Miller grunted. He whipped the horses, though the beasts were already lathered with sweat. "You in a hurry, miss?" "I just want to arrive before dark," Nora said. "Darkness comes fast out here," Miller said, and there was a tone in his voice she did not like, a slyness. They rounded a bend and saw it, the relay station. It was not a bustling outpost. It was a ruin. The roof of the main building had collapsed years ago, likely under the weight of winter snows or just the sheer exhaustion of existing. The adobe walls were melting back into the earth from which they came, but standing at the entrance to the yard was a wooden gate. It was rotting, hanging crookedly by a single rusted hinge. It swung slightly in the hot wind, creaking a mournful tune. Creak, thud, creak, thud. Nora stared at that gate. Back in Boston, a gate meant safety. It meant a garden, a home, a boundary between the public street and the private sanctuary. A gate was civilized. Here, this rotting timber was a mockery of safety. It marked nothing. The desert flowed through it and around it. It was a threshold between the illusion of civilization she had left behind and the brutal, naked truth of the frontier. The buckboard slowed as they approached the gate. "Why are we stopping?" Nora asked, gripping her ledger tighter. "This place is abandoned." Miller pulled on the reins. The horses blew air through their nostrils, stomping nervously. "Horses need a rest," Miller said, but he didn't look at the horses. He looked up at the rocks surrounding the station. Nora followed his gaze. The silence of the desert was sudden and overwhelming. The cicadas had stopped buzzing. The wind had died down. She looked at the rotting gate again. It stood open, inviting them into the ruin. She realized then that the gate was not an entrance to safety. It was a mouth, and she was sitting right on the tongue. Up on the ridge, Kohana stood up. He reached over his shoulder and checked the fletching on his arrows. The woman was walking into a trap, and she did not know that the man beside her was the bait. Nora felt the hair on her arm stand up. She pressed her arm against her side, feeling the crinkle of the envelope against her ribs. The evidence, the truth. "Mr. Miller," Nora said, her voice low and dangerous. "Drive the wagon." "Can't do that, Miss," Miller said, and for the first time, he looked at her with open malice. "I got orders to wait right here." Nora Whitaker looked at the rotting gate, then at the vast, unforgiving sky. She took a breath of the hot air, tasting the dust. She thought of Arthur, who said she was too difficult. She thought of Creed, who thought she could be bought. She reached into her boot and pulled out the small, pearl-handled Derringer she had bought in St. Louis. It was a toy compared to the guns the men out here carried, but it was hers. "I said," Nora repeated, leveling the small barrel at Miller's ribs. "Drive the wagon." But before Miller could answer, the first shot rang out from the rocks, shattering the silence and the illusion of control. The rotting gate creaked one last time as the chaos of the West finally descended upon them. The gunshot that shattered the silence did not hit Nora, nor did it hit Miller. It struck the ground just in front of the lead horse, sending a spray of red dirt into the air. The team of horses screamed, rearing back in their harnesses, the sudden violence of the motion nearly throwing Nora from the buckboard seat. She grabbed the iron rail, her knuckles turning white. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at Miller, expecting to see fear, expecting him to whip the reins and drive them out of this kill box. Instead, Miller was calm. He pulled the brake lever back with a slow, deliberate grind of metal on metal. He did not reach for the rifle under his seat. He spat a stream of tobacco juice over the side of the wagon, watching the rocks where the smoke from the rifle discharge was drifting away on the wind. "Stay put," Miller grunted. But he was not talking to the horses. He was talking to her. The realization hit Nora colder than any winter wind in Boston. "You knew," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the stomping of the frightened horses. "You did not take a wrong turn. You brought me here." Miller turned to look at her, his eyes flat and devoid of apology. "A man has to eat, Miss Whitaker, and Mr. Creed pays in gold, not promises. Hand over the envelope." Nora's hand flew to her chest, pressing against the thick fabric of her traveling jacket. "This is mail. It is a federal offense to—" "Ain't no federals out here," Miller interrupted, his voice hardening. "Just rocks and graves. Now give it here before the boys come down and take it." 3 men emerged from the ruins of the relay station. They wore long dusters that hid their bodies, and hats pulled low to obscure their faces. They did not move like desperate bandits looking for a coin purse. They moved with the tactical precision of soldiers, or hired killers. They were not looking at the trunk strapped to the back of the wagon. They were looking at her. Panic, sharp and blinding, surged through Nora. If she gave them the envelope, the water would be stolen, the ranchers ruined, and she would likely be killed anyway to silence the witness. If she kept it, she would have died. She had only one choice. Nora scrambled backward over the seat, tumbling into the bed of the wagon. Her fingers worked frantically at the buttons of her bodice. It was an act of desperation, stripping away the layers of propriety that had bound her all her life. She shoved her gloved hand into the neckline of her chemise, forcing the thick, wax-sealed envelope down against her skin. The rough paper scratched her breast. The hard wax seal pressed painfully against her rib cage, nestled deep between the boning of her corset and the soft flesh of her body. It was intimate, intrusive, and terrifying, but it was the only safe place she had. "Get her!" one of the men from the ruins shouted. Nora grabbed her valise and threw it at Miller's head as he climbed over the seat. The heavy bag struck him on the shoulder, knocking him off balance. She vaulted over the side of the wagon, her skirt catching on a splinter of wood, ripping with a sound like tearing paper. She hit the ground hard. The impact jarred her teeth and sent a shockwave up her spine. She scrambled to her feet, dust choking her, her vision blurring. She began to run toward the rocks, away from the road, away from the men. "Don't shoot her yet," a voice roared behind her. "Get the papers first." Nora's boots slipped on the loose shale. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She was a woman of ledgers and ink, not a creature of the wild. Every step was a battle against the terrain. She heard heavy footsteps behind her, the crunch of boots gaining ground. She reached a narrow fissure in the canyon wall, a shadow amidst the red glare. Suddenly, a hand shot out from the darkness. It was not a hand reaching to help. It was a clamp of steel. Nora opened her mouth to scream, but a calloused palm slammed over her lips, stifling the sound to a muffled whimper. An arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet with terrifying strength. She was hauled backward into the fissure, her back slamming against a hard, lean chest. She kicked out, thrashing, her mind screaming one word: Apache. The stories from the newspapers in the East flooded her mind, tales of savagery, of scalps, of torture. The man holding her smelled of sage smoke, old leather, and sweat. He did not smell like the whiskey-soaked men of the town. "Quiet!" a voice hissed in her ear. It was deep, accented, but clear. "If you want to live, do not run toward the guns." Nora froze. The grip on her waist loosened slightly, just enough to let her breathe, but not enough to let her go. She looked up. Kohana looked down at her. Up close. He was terrifying in his intensity. His face was painted with a single streak of black ash across his cheekbones. His eyes were dark, devoid of the lust she had seen in the men outside the saloon, but filled with a focused, lethal calculation. He held a knife in his other hand, the blade dull with use but sharp enough to shave the hair off an arm. He was not looking at her with malice. He was looking past her, out at the opening of the fissure. "Where did she go?" Miller's voice echoed from just yards away. "She is in the rocks. Flush her out," another man commanded. Kohana looked at Nora. His gaze dropped for a fraction of a second to the frantic pulse beating at the base of her throat, then to the unnatural bulge beneath the fabric of her bodice where the envelope lay hidden. He knew. He had to know. But he did not reach for it. He sheathed his knife in one fluid motion and pointed deeper into the crevice. "Move," he commanded. "They will see us," Nora whispered, her voice trembling. "They will not see anything," Kohana said. He pointed to the horizon. Nora looked. The sky to the west had turned a bruised, angry purple. A wall of darkness was rising from the earth, stretching from the ground to the heavens. It was not raining. It was dust. A haboob. "Go," Kohana said. And this time, he shoved her. Not gently, but urgently. They scrambled up a narrow goat path as the wind began to howl. The temperature dropped rapidly. The first grains of sand hit Nora's face like buckshot. Within seconds, the blue sky was gone, replaced by a choking, swirling brown fog. The world disappeared. The gunmen below shouted, but their voices were swallowed by the roar of the wind. Nora could not see her own hand in front of her face. She stumbled, blindingly groping for purchase on the slick rock. She felt a hand grip her wrist hard, unyielding. Kohana pulled her. He did not wait for her to catch her breath. He moved through the blinding storm as if he could see the invisible lines of the earth. For what felt like hours, they climbed. The sand scoured Nora's skin. It filled her nose, her mouth, her ears. She felt as though the desert was trying to erase her, to grind her down until she was just another part of the landscape. The envelope pressed against her skin, a hot brand of wax and paper, a constant reminder of why she was enduring this hell. Finally, the wind eased slightly. Kohana pulled her down into a depression in the rock, a shallow cave hidden beneath an overhang of sandstone. He let go of her wrist. Nora collapsed against the cold stone wall, coughing up dust. Her lungs burned. Her eyes streamed with tears, trying to flush out the grit. Kohana sat opposite her near the mouth of the cave. He did not cough. He pulled a canteen from his shoulder and took a small sip, then extended it to her. "Drink," he said. "Small sips, or you will be sick." Nora took the canteen with shaking hands. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever consumed. She drank, forcing herself to stop before she gulped it all down. She handed it back. "Thank you," she rasped. Kohana did not acknowledge the thanks. He began to gather a small pile of dried brush from the corner of the cave, striking a spark with a piece of flint. A small fire crackled to life, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. In the firelight, Nora finally got a good look at him. He was younger than she had thought, perhaps 30. His clothes were worn but mended with care. He wore a necklace of turquoise beads that stood out starkly against his bronze skin. He was watching her, too. He watched her hands, which were bleeding from the climb. He watched the way she subconsciously pressed her arm against her chest to protect the hidden envelope. "You carry death in your shirt," Kohana said. It was not a question. Nora stiffened. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself. "I carry property that belongs to the federal government." "The government," Kohana said, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. He poked the fire with a stick. "The men who attacked you, they are not the government. They are Creed's men." Nora's breath hitched. "How do you know Silas Creed? The snake leaves a trail," Kohana said. "He wants the water. He pays men to kill for paper." He looked her in the eye. "Miller, the driver. He has been taking Creed's money for 2 months. You were sold before you stepped on the wagon." Nora felt a wave of nausea. She had trusted Miller. She had trusted the system to protect her. "Why did you save me?" she asked. The question hung in the air, heavy with the prejudices she had been raised with. They say your people act only for vengeance." Kohana's expression hardened. "They say many things. They say we eat children. They say we do not feel pain." He looked away, staring out into the swirling dust storm outside. "I did not save you for you. I saved you because what you hide in your dress. If Creed gets it, my people die of thirst just as surely as the ranchers." Nora flushed. The mention of where the envelope was hidden made her skin prickle with a strange mix of shame and defiance. "It is evidence," she said, her voice regaining some of its steel. "Proof that the survey lines were moved, that the spring belongs to the public trust, not the railroad. Paper," Kohana scoffed. "Paper burns. Paper lies." "This paper is the truth," Nora insisted. She leaned forward, wincing as the movement pressed the wax seal into her bruised flesh. "And I'm going to deliver it." Kohana looked at her then, really looked at her. He saw the torn dress, the bloody hands, the dust matting her hair, but he also saw the set of her jaw. She was trembling. Yes, she was terrified. Yes, but she was not broken. "The storm will last until morning," Kohana said, effectively ending the conversation about motives. "Sleep. If you snore, I will put you outside." It was a joke, dry and brittle, but a joke nonetheless. Nora blinked, surprised. She adjusted her position, trying to find comfort on the hard stone floor. "I do not snore," she said, lying down and turning her back to him, though she knew she would not sleep. She lay there in the dim light, listening to the wind scream outside. She could feel Kohana's presence behind her, a silent, steady weight. She realized then that she had crossed a line. Yesterday, she was a woman seeking a job, seeking a way to fix a mistake in a ledger. Tonight, she was a fugitive. She pressed her hand over her heart, feeling the crinkle of the envelope. She thought of the comfortable parlor in Boston she had left behind. She thought of the safety of a life where decisions were made for her. She could have thrown the envelope to the gunman. She could have run away, but the anger that had driven her west flared up again, hotter than the fire. Silas Creed thought he could buy the world. He thought he could buy her compliance with fear. "No," Nora thought, her fingers curling into a fist against the stone. "I will not be erased." "Kohana," she whispered into the darkness. There was a long pause. "I am here. I am not going back," she said. "I am taking this to the judge, even if I have to walk every mile." "Then you will need better boots," Kohana said from the shadows. "And you will need to learn to walk without sound." Nora closed her eyes. The envelope scratched her skin, a constant, painful reminder of the pact she had just made. The storm raged on, burying the world she knew in dust, leaving only the woman, the warrior, and the truth hidden against her heart. The journey back to Ocotillo Flats was not a march of triumph, but a ghost walk through the shimmering heat. They avoided the main stage road, sticking instead to the goat trails and dry washes that only a creature born of the desert could navigate. Kohana moved with a silence that unnerved Nora. He did not snap twigs. He did not slide on loose shale. He simply existed in one space and then appeared in the next. Nora, by contrast, felt loud and clumsy, her boots crunching on the gravel, her breath sawing in her throat. They reached the outskirts of the town just as the sun began to bleed into the western horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and orange. They did not enter through the main street. Kohana led her through the labyrinth of back alleys, past the piles of refuse behind the saloon and the stables, until they reached the rear door of the whitewashed boarding house. May Hollis opened the door before Nora could even knock, as if the woman had been waiting with her ear pressed to the wood. She took one look at Nora, her torn dress, the streaks of red dust on her face, the wildness in her eyes, and then looked at the tall Apache warrior standing like a sentinel behind her. "Get in," May said, her voice low and rough like grinding stones. "Before half the town sees you and the other half invents a story about it." Inside, the air smelled of lye soap and boiling cabbage. It was the smell of civilization, and it made Nora's knees weak with relief. May ushered them into the back room she used for laundry, a space filled with steam and drying sheets that offered a white, linen sanctuary. "I thought you were dead," May said, pouring water from a pitcher into a basin. "Miller came back alone, said bandits hit the wagon, said you ran off into the rocks and the Apache took you." "Miller lied," Nora said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. She dipped a cloth into the water and pressed it to her face. The cool wetness felt like a benediction. "Miller and the men who attacked us are on the same payroll, and the Apache did not take me. He saved me." May looked at Kohana. He was standing by the back door, his body tense, his dark eyes scanning the room as if expecting an attack from the ironing board. He looked out of place among the lace curtains and porcelain pitchers, a wild element trapped in a domestic cage. "I know this one," May said, drying her hands on her apron. "He scouts for the army sometimes. Kai, isn't it?" "Kohana," he corrected, his voice flat. "Well, Kohana or Kai, you cannot stay here," May said, though her tone lacked real heat. "Deputy Rourke has been prowling the streets looking for someone to blame for the disturbance. If he finds you here with a white woman, he will not ask questions first." "I am not leaving her," Kohana said. He did not cross his arms. He just stood there, immovable as a mesa. Nora turned to look at him, surprised by the fierce possessiveness in his tone. It was not the possessiveness of a lover, not yet, but of a guardian who had decided that her safety was now his personal war. "He stays," Nora said. "If he goes, I go," May sighed, a sound that seemed to deflate her ample frame. "Fine, but he sleeps in the shed out back. And you, Missy, you need to stitch that dress. You look like you wrestled a bobcat and lost." That evening, the true nature of their predicament began to take shape. While May watched the front of the house, Nora sat at the small kitchen table. She finally reached into her bodice and pulled out the envelope. The wax seal was cracked, warm from her body heat. Her hands trembled as she broke it open and spread the documents out on the wooden table. Kohana came in from the shadows of the porch. He moved silently to the table and looked down at the papers. They were covered in dense script and complex topographic lines. "This is the canyon," Nora said, tracing a blue line on the map. "Painted rock spring." I know the land," Kohana said. "I do not need paper to tell me where the water flows." "But this paper says the water does not flow where you think it does," Nora said, her anger rising again. "Look here, this survey date. It is dated 3 weeks from now. It has not even happened yet. And these signatures," she pointed to a list of names at the bottom of a deed transfer. "Old Man Galloway, Widow Hennessy, they signed over their water rights to the Arizona Pacific Expansion Company. Galloway cannot write," Kohana said. "He signs with a mark." "Exactly," Nora said. "These are full signatures, forgeries, or coerced by someone guiding their hands." She looked up at him, her pale eyes burning. "Silas Creed is not just buying land. Kohana, he is stealing the source. If this goes through, he can dam the spring legally. He can charge every rancher and farmer for every drop. He can cut off the reservation completely." Kohana's jaw tightened, the muscle feathered near his ear. "He wants to own the rain. He wants to be God in this valley," Nora replied. "And I am the only one with the proof that he is just a thief." The next morning brought the harsh light of social reality. Nora needed to go to the general store for thread and supplies, refusing to hide like a criminal. She washed her dress, mended the tear as best she could, and pinned her hair up severely. She would not give them the satisfaction of looking broken. Kohana insisted on walking with her. He walked 2 paces behind her and to the left, the traditional position of a protector. But in the streets of Ocotillo Flats, it looked like a provocation. The town had changed since she arrived. The indifference was gone, replaced by a sticky, venomous curiosity. Women sweeping their porches stopped to stare, whispering behind their hands. Men outside the saloon fell silent, spitting tobacco juice into the dust with deliberate disrespect. "Look at that," a voice called out. "White woman walking with a savage. Guess the stories about the captivity were not so terrible after all." Nora kept her chin high, her spine rigid. She heard the words. They were a bit deeper than the sandstorm. They were stripping her of her virtue, her standing, her humanity. In Boston, a woman's reputation was glass. Once cracked, it was discarded. Here, she realized, she had to be made of iron. Deputy Rourke stepped off the boardwalk, blocking their path. He was a thick-necked man with a face that flushed red easily. His thumbs were hooked into his gun belt. "Now, Miss Whitaker," Rourke drawled, ignoring Kohana completely. "Mr. Creed was very concerned about you. Said you were confused. Said the heat got to your head and you ran off." He stepped closer, smelling of stale beer and hair tonic. "He wants to make sure you are safe, and that you hand over any personal property you might be carrying that could get lost." "I am perfectly safe, Deputy," Nora said, her voice ice-cold. "And my property is my own concern." Rourke's eyes shifted to Kohana. The malice there was undisguised. "And you are off the reservation, boy. I could shoot you for vagrancy and get a thank you from the mayor." Kohana did not flinch. He did not reach for the knife at his belt, but the air around him seemed to crackle. "I am a scout for the United States Army," he said, his voice calm. "I have papers. I don't care if you have a letter from the president." Rourke spat. He put his hand on the butt of his revolver. "Is there a problem here, Deputy?" The voice was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly familiar. Silas Creed stepped out of the barber shop. He looked immaculate in a fresh linen suit, a stark contrast to the dust and grime of the street. He smiled at Nora, a smile that didn't reach his slate-gray eyes. "Miss Whitaker," Creed said, bowing slightly. "Thank heavens. We were organizing a search party. I was terrified the Apaches had mistreated you." He used the word mistreated with a deliberate pause, letting the implication hang in the air like a foul smell. He was shaping the narrative right there in the street. He was painting her as a victim, a hysterical woman, or worse, a woman who had been soiled and was no longer reliable. "I was not mistreated. Mr. Creed," Nora said loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "I was rescued after your driver abandoned me to road agents." Creed laughed, a light, dismissive sound. Poor Miller. He stumbled back into town sunblind. He said you panicked, but it doesn't matter. You are safe now. Come, let me escort you to the hotel. We can discuss the Misunderstanding over a cold drink. I'm staying with May Hollis, Nora said. And I have nothing to discuss with you. She stepped around Rourke. Kohana moved with her, his body shielding her from the deputy's glare. As they walked away, Nora could feel the eyes of the town boring into her back. She did not look down. She did not falter. He is afraid of you, Kohana said quietly when they were out of earshot. Creed, Nora asked. He looks very confident to me. No, Kohana said. He talks too much. A man who is sure of his kill does not make speeches. He is afraid of what you carry. They returned to the safety of May's yard, but the sense of siege had followed them. The sanctuary felt fragile now. Nora sat on the back porch, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to thread a needle to fix the hem of her petticoat. She missed the eye of the needle 3 times. A brown hand reached out and gently took the needle from her. Kohana sat on the step below her. He took the thread and, with steady, precise movements, threaded the eye in one try. He handed it back to her. His fingers brushed hers a brief, electric contact that made her breath catch. You have hands for ledgers, he said softly. Not for mending. I am learning, Nora said, looking at his hands. They were scared, strong, capable of violence, yet incredibly gentle. Why do you stay? Kohana Rourke will find a reason to arrest you. Or worse. Kohana looked out at the dry hills. My sister, he said. She died 3 winters ago. Fever. She died asking for water. The spring was too far, and the soldiers would not let us move camp. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes intense. I promised her that I would protect the water. You are the key to the water, so I will protect you. Nora felt a lump in her throat. It was not romance that bound them. It was grief and duty, and yet, sitting there in the dusty shade, with the smell of sage and danger in the air, she felt a closeness to him that she had never felt with Arthur in the polite drawing rooms of Boston. Arthur had wanted a decoration. Kohana saw a warrior. Suddenly, the back gate creaked open. A boy of about 12, skinny as a rail and covered in freckles, slipped inside. It was Toby, the telegraph runner. He looked terrified. Miss May, the boy whispered. May bustled out of the kitchen. Toby, what are you doing sneaking around like a coyote? I got a message, the boy said, glancing nervously at Kohana. Or, I heard a message coming in on the wire. It wasn't for me to hear, but I heard it. He looked at Nora. It's about the meeting. Mr. Creed moved it up. What meeting? Nora asked. Standing up. Sunday service, Toby said breathlessly. At the church, 2 days from now. Reverend Thomas is going to preach on render unto Caesar. Creed is going to be there with a notary. He's going to make everybody sign the new water district papers right there in the pews. He told Rourke that anyone who doesn't sign is an enemy of progress and will be taxed triple. Sunday, Nora whispered. That is too soon. The federal judge is a 3-day ride away. He knows, Kohana said. He is closing the trap. And there is more, Toby added, twisting his cap in his hands. I saw one of Rourke's men near the livery stable, near your buckboard horses. He was messing with the saddles. Cut the cinches halfway through, on the inside where you can't see. Nora went cold. If they had tried to leave today, the saddle would have snapped at a gallop. They would have been thrown and likely killed or easily captured. They do not want me to leave, Nora said. They want me here, trapped, until the signing is done. She looked at Kohana. The fear was gone from her chest, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The transition was complete. She was no longer the victim of a robbery. She was a player in the game. We cannot run to the judge, Nora said, her voice firm. We would never make it past Rourke's patrols, and even if we did, we would be too late to stop the signing. Then what do we do? May asked, wiping her hands on her apron. You can't fight Creed. He owns the town. He owns the fear, Nora corrected. She looked at the envelope on the table, then at Kohana. He is banking on the fact that I'm a scared Eastern woman who will hide until it is over. He thinks I'm ashamed of being seen with an Apache. He thinks I am weak." Kohana stood up. He towered over her. But his presence was an anchor, not a threat. "What are you thinking?" "Nora." It was the first time he had used her name. It sounded different on his tongue, rougher, realer. "I'm thinking," Nora said, a dangerous light entering her eyes, "that if he wants a show at the church on Sunday, we should give him one. He wants to use the law, fine. I have the law right here in my bodice." "It is dangerous," Kohana warned. "If you walk into that church, you walk into the wolf's den, there will be no rocks to hide behind." "I am done hiding," Nora said. She reached out and touched Kohana's arm. The muscle was as hard as iron beneath her fingers. "You told me not to run toward the guns. But sometimes, Kohana, you have to walk right up to the gunman and look him in the eye." Kohana looked down at her hand on his arm. He did not pull away. A slow, grim smile touched his lips. It was the smile of a man who had finally found a comrade worth dying for. "Then we will walk," Kohana said. "I will sharpen my knife." "And I," Nora said, picking up the ledger, "will sharpen my facts." As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, the domestic scene transformed into a war council. May began to cook a stew, chopping carrots with violent force. Kohana sat by the door, whittling a piece of hardwood into a trigger mechanism for a trap, and Nora sat by the lamp, memorizing the names and numbers in the documents, turning the ink into ammunition. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose tin on the roof. The town of Ocotillo Flats settled into an uneasy sleep, unaware that the woman they had shunned and the warrior they feared were about to light a fire that would burn their corruption to the ground. Nora watched the flame in the oil lamp dance. She was terrified. Yes, but for the first time in her life, she was choosing the danger. She was choosing the fight, and looking at the silent shadow of the Apache warrior across the room. She knew she was not fighting alone. The morning sun did not bring clarity to Ocotillo Flats. It brought a fresh layer of poison. Nora Whitaker stood in the shadows of the alley behind the general store, staring at the sheet of paper nailed to a telegraph pole. The ink was cheap and smeared, but the message was legible enough to stop her heart. It was a wanted poster, unauthorized and crude, yet damning. It featured a rough sketch of a woman who vaguely resembled her, though the artist had given her eyes a wild, manic look, and beside her, a caricature of an Apache warrior with a knife in his teeth. Wanted. The poster screamed in block letters, for fraud and conspiracy against the honest citizens of the territory. The woman known as Nora is a confidence trickster. The Apache known as Kai is wanted for the abduction and corruption of a white woman. Reward, $50. He is thorough. Kohana's voice came from the shadows behind her. He did not step into the light. To be seen now was to be hunted. "He is isolating us," Nora said, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. "He is not just calling me a thief. He is painting me as a fallen woman. He knows that in this town, a woman without her virtue is worth less than a horse with a broken leg." They moved back toward the boarding house, sticking to the narrow spaces between buildings. But the town felt smaller now, the walls closer. As they crossed the dusty expanse of the side street near the livery, a shadow detached itself from the wall of the jailhouse. "Well now," came the voice of Deputy Rourke. "If it isn't a happy couple." Nora froze. It was just past 8 o'clock in the evening. The sun was down, but the twilight lingered, painting the world in treacherous shades of gray. "We are walking home, Deputy," Nora said, keeping her voice level. "Curfew," Rourke said, stepping forward. He rested his hand on the pearl handle of his revolver. "Town ordinance, no vagrants or Indians on the street after sunset. And since you are looking mighty cozy with a vagrant Indian, Miss Whitaker, I reckon that makes you one too. I'll have to take you in. For your own protection, of course." He smiled, a wet, unpleasant expression. "Mister, Creed offered his guest house for your detention. Very comfortable." Kohana shifted his weight. It was a subtle movement, a coiling of muscle that promised violence. Nora knew that if Rourke touched her, Kohana would kill him. And if Kohana killed a lawman, even a crooked one, there would be no trial, only a rope. She ain't a vagrant. Rourke! May Hollis stepped off the back porch of her boarding house, a basket of wet laundry on her hip and a heavy iron skillet in her other hand. She looked like a battleship in a floral apron. "She works for me," May declared, marching into the street. "She is my bookkeeper and my laundress, and as far as I know, employees are allowed to walk to their place of business." Rourke sneered, looking between the three of them. "Since when?" "May, you have never hired help in 20 years. "Since my arthritis started acting up this morning." May lied smoothly. "Now get off my property line." "Rourke, unless you want to explain to the sheriff why you are harassing a tax-paying business owner." Rourke spat into the dust, missing Nora's boot by an inch. "Fine, but keep your savage on a leash. If I see him cross Main Street, I shoot." He turned and swaggered away. Nora let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. She looked at May. "Thank you," Nora whispered. "Don't thank me yet," May grumbled, handing Nora the laundry basket. "If you are my employee, you might as well look the part. Scrub the shirts. It gives you an alibi." For the next 2 days, they lived in a state of besieged preparation. The boarding house became their fortress. By day, Nora worked in the yard, scrubbing the red dust out of miners' shirts until her knuckles were raw. It was a performance, a way to show the town she was humble, hard-working, and sane. But in the quiet hours of the afternoon and the dead of night, the real work happened. They sat on the floor of the shed where Kohana slept. The map spread out between them. It was a trade of survival skills, a desperate education. "You walk like a cow," Kohana said bluntly, watching Nora try to move across the wooden floor without creaking the boards. "I am wearing boots designed for pavement," Nora retorted, though she stopped moving. "The earth does not care about your boots," Kohana said. He stood up. "Watch my feet. You step with the heel first. That is the white man's walk. It sends a shock up your spine and breaks the twig before you know it is there." He moved, placing the outside edge of his foot down first, rolling it inward. "Silence. Touch the ground before you trust it," he instructed. "Feel for the stick. Feel for the snake. Then commit your weight." Nora tried. She stumbled, feeling foolish, but she tried again and again. She learned to breathe through her nose to keep her mouth from drying out. She learned that the wind carried sound up the canyon walls in the morning and down in the evening. She learned that the desert was not empty silence. It was a conversation she had never been taught to hear. In return, she taught him the language of the enemy. "This symbol," Nora said, pointing to a squiggly line on the ledger page. "It looks like a river, but in a contract, it means easement. It means they can build a road through your house and you cannot stop them." Kohana traced the ink with a calloused finger. "And this? That is force majeure," Nora explained. "It means superior force. They use it to say that if a storm destroys the dam, they are not responsible. But they also use it to claim that if the natives are restless, they can bring in the army to protect their investment." Kohana looked at her, his eyes dark with understanding. "They have words for theft that sound like law." "That is exactly what they have," Nora said. On the evening of the second day, they knew they could wait no longer. The Sunday meeting was approaching. They had to be certain that the physical reality of the canyon matched the fraudulent map Nora carried. If Creed had already altered the landscape, the paper proof might not be enough. They slipped out of town just as the sun began its descent, using the dry wash to cover their tracks. Nora moved better now. She placed her feet with care, rolling her weight, listening to the rhythm of the land. They reached the canyon entrance as the light turned golden. The painted rock spring was a miracle in the stone. Cottonwood trees, their leaves shaking like gold coins, clustered around a pool of water so clear it looked like glass. The red rock walls rose high on either side, protecting this oasis from the harshness of the world above. Nora knelt by the water. She splashed it on her face, washing away the fear and the dust. It was cool and sweet. "It matches," she said, pulling the map from her bodice. "See, the survey marker is supposed to be here, by this dead mesquite. And the property line cuts right through the center of the pool." Kohana stood guard, his eyes scanning the rim of the canyon. "They want to fence the water," he said, his voice full of disgust. "They want to put a gate on their mother's milk." Nora sat back on her heels. The beauty of the place was overwhelming, and it made the ugliness of Creed's plan feel even more violative. The weight of it all, the danger, the lies, the sheer magnitude of the fight suddenly crashed down on her. She looked at her hands. They were red and chapped from the laundry water, her fingernails broken. She was a long way from the girl who had played piano in a Boston parlor. "I'm afraid," she said softly. Kohana turned to her. He did not tell her not to be afraid. He did not offer empty comfort. He simply waited. "I am not afraid of dying," Nora continued, her voice trembling. "I am afraid of starting again. I came west to find a place where I could be myself. But ever since I arrived, I have been reacting, running from bandits, hiding from lawmen, playing the role of the laundress, playing the role of the victim." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "My fiancé, Arthur, he planned my whole life, the house we would live in, the clothes I would wear, the friends I would have. When he left me, I thought I was free. But now Creed is writing the story. Rourke is writing the story. They are deciding who I am." She stood up, the map crinkling in her hand. "I am terrified that I will never just be, that I will always be a character in someone else's script." The wind sighed through the cottonwood leaves, a sound like 1,000 whispers. The sun was dipping below the canyon rim, casting them in a soft, twilight shadow. Kohana stepped closer. He invaded her space, but not with aggression. He brought with him the scent of pine resin and the heat of the living earth. He reached out and took the map from her hand, placing it gently on the rock. Then he looked at her. He saw the woman who had pointed a pistol at a driver. He saw the woman who had scrubbed shirts until her hands bled to buy them time. "Nora," he said. She looked up at him. She was tired, bone-deep tired. The fight seemed so long, and the future so uncertain. She murmured, "Where should I begin?" It was a question about the map, about the fight, about her life. The Apache took her hand. He lifted it, not to his lips, but to his chest. He pressed her palm flat against the solid wall of his muscle, directly over his heart. She could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of it, thump, 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 thump. It was a drumbeat of survival, a song that had been singing in these canyons for 1,000 years. He held her gaze, his eyes stripping away the layers of dust and pretense. "Anywhere close to forever," he said. The world seemed to stop. The wind held its breath. The distance between them, which had been measured in cultures and wars and prejudices, vanished. Nora leaned in. It was not a decision of the mind, but a pull of the soul. Kohana lowered his head. His lips brushed hers. It was not the hungry, taking kiss she had feared from men. It was a gift. It was warm and firm and tasted of the wild sage. It was a promise made without paper, a contract signed in breath and blood. Nora let out a soft sound, half sob, half sigh, and melted into him. For a moment, she was not a fugitive, and he was not a savage. They were just two people finding an anchor in a world that was trying to blow them away. The kiss deepened, a slow burn that promised heat but respected the fragility of the moment. He held her as if she were made of water, precious and life-sustaining. Then, the wind shifted. Kohana broke the kiss abruptly. His body became rigid against hers. The tenderness vanished from his eyes, replaced instantly by the sharp, predatory look of the scout. "What is it?" Nora whispered, her hand still on his chest, feeling his heart rate spike. "Sulfur," Kohana hissed. He grabbed her hand and pulled her away from the water's edge, moving low toward the canyon wall. He scanned the base of the red rock, where the shadows were deepest. There, tucked behind a cluster of boulders near the source of the spring, was a wooden crate. Kohana knelt beside it, He brushed away the loose sand. Inside the crate were sticks of dynamite, sweating in the heat, connected to a crude fuse made of twisted cloth soaked in kerosene. Technology. Kohana spat the word like a curse. Nora knelt beside him, horror cold in her veins. She looked at the placement of the explosives. They are not just going to dam the water, she realized, tracing the line of the rock face with her eyes. If they blow this section of the wall, the rock slide will bury the spring entirely. The water will be forced underground. It will come up 3 miles south. On Creed's land, Kohana finished. He steals the water by moving the earth. And if this goes off, Nora said, her mind racing, who will they blame? The Apache. Kohana said, they will say we destroyed the water to keep the white man from having it. It will be the excuse the army needs to clear the entire territory. Nora looked at the crude fuse. It was not lit, but the intention was clear. This was the final move. The meeting on Sunday was a distraction. The explosion was the reality. We cannot just cut the fuse, Nora said, her voice turning hard. If we disable it, they will just bring more. We have to stop the hand that lights it. She looked at Kohana. The softness of the kiss was gone, but the connection remained, stronger than before. They were partners now. Sunday, Nora said. Creed will be at the church, ensuring the town is looking the other way when his men light this fuse. I will not let them light it, Kohana vowed. I will call the others, my cousins. We will watch this place. No, Nora said. If your people are seen here with weapons, Rourke will start a shooting war. You need witnesses, white witnesses. She grabbed his arm. There are ranchers who haven't signed yet, men who trust the land more than the bank. Go to them. Tell them to come here on Sunday morning to inspect the water levels. If they are standing here, Creed's men cannot blow the wall without killing white voters. And you, Kohana asked, his eyes searching hers. I am going to the church, Nora said. I am going to walk into that meeting with the map and the ledger. I am going to show them that the water they are signing for is about to be buried. It is a trap, Kohana said. Creed will have his gun hands there. Let him, Nora said. She touched the spot on his chest where her hand had rested moments ago. I am not afraid of the script anymore. Kohana, I am going to write my own ending. Kohana looked at her with fierce pride. He took her hand one last time, squeezing it hard enough to bruise a warrior's handshake. Then walk tall, Nora Whitaker, he said, and I will hold the water. The sun is gone now. The canyon was plunged into darkness, but as they separated, moving to their respective tasks, neither of them stumbled. They knew exactly where they were going. The Sunday morning sun beat down on the whitewashed clapboard of the Ocotillo Flats Community Church, turning the interior into a kiln. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale sweat, lavender water, and fear. Every pew was packed. Ranchers sat with their hats in their laps, their knuckles white as they gripped the brims. Miners stood in the back, restless and dusty. At the front, near the altar where the Reverend Thomas usually spoke of salvation, stood Silas Creed. Creed looked cool and untouchable in his linen suit. He held a sheaf of papers in one hand, waving them gently like a fan. Progress, Creed was saying, his voice projecting smoothly to the back of the room, is not a tide that waits. It is a train. You either get on board or you get crushed on the tracks. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the anxious faces. The Arizona Pacific Expansion Company is offering you a partnership. We manage the water district. We ensure the flow. We build the dams that will turn this dust bowl into an orchard. All we ask is your signature on the district charter. And if we don't sign, a voice called out. It was Old Man Galloway, his voice shaking but defiant. Creed smiled, a gesture that showed teeth but no warmth. Then, Mr. Galloway, we cannot guarantee your access. The water rights are complex. Without the company's legal protection, federal reallocation could dry up your creek by next summer. And I have heard reports of Apache activity near the source. It would be a tragedy if savages were to damage the supply. A murmur of fear rippled through the room. Creed was playing them like a fiddle. using the twin strings of greed and terror. Sign, Creed urged softly. For your families, for your future. The heavy oak doors at the back of the church groaned open. A silhouette stood framed by the blinding white light of the street. Dust swirled around the hem of a dark dress that had been mended with visible, determined stitches. Nora Whitaker stepped into the nave. She did not look like a victim. She did not look like the hysterical Eastern woman Creed had painted her to be. She held the heavy leather ledger against her chest like a shield. "Do not sign," Nora said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmurs like a bell. Heads turned. Creed's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before freezing into a mask of polite condescension. "Miss Whitaker," Creed said, "we are in the middle of a prayerful gathering. Perhaps you should return to the boarding house and rest." Nora walked down the center aisle. Her boots rang out on the wooden floorboards heel-toe. Heel-toe, a steady rhythm she had learned in the silence of the desert. "I am done resting, Mr. Creed," she said. She reached the front row and turned to face the town. She opened the ledger. "And you are done lying. This woman is confused," Creed announced loudly, signaling to Deputy Rourke, who was standing by the vestry door. "She has been under a great strain." "Is it a strain to read Mr. Creed?" Nora asked, holding up a page. "Because I see here a transfer of deed for the Painted Rock Spring dated October 14th. That is 2 weeks from today. And I see a signature here for Lucas Miller." She looked at a woman in the third row. "Mrs. Miller, your husband died of the fever last winter, did he not? How did he sign this document last Thursday?" The room went deadly silent. Mrs. Miller stood up, her face pale. "Lucas, but Mr. Creed said the papers were just for the survey." "They are not for a survey," Nora declared, her voice rising with the strength of the truth. "They are a total cession of rights. And this map—" She pulled the wax-stained map from her bodice, the paper crinkling in the silence. "This map shows a diversion dam that doesn't exist yet, a dam that requires blowing up the canyon wall." "She is lying," Creed snapped, his composure cracking. "She is a fraud, Rourke. Remove her." Deputy Rourke stepped forward, his hand heavy on his gun. "You heard the man. Miss Whitaker. You're disturbing the peace. Sit down." "Rourke." The command came from the side aisle. May Hollis stood up. She was not holding a hymnal. She was holding a double-barreled shotgun, the barrels resting casually over the back of the pew in front of her. "May," Rourke warned, his eyes narrowing. "I said sit down," May repeated. "Nora works for me, and in this town, we listen to a woman when she's holding the bill." 2 ranchers stood up next to May, then another. The fear that Creed had carefully cultivated was breaking, replaced by the anger of men who realized they were being played for fools. Creed looked around the room. He saw the shift. He saw his control evaporating. His eyes turned hard, stripping away the gentleman to reveal the wolf. "You want the truth?" Creed sneered. "Fine. The truth is that you are listening to a woman who shares her bed with a savage, a woman who conspires with the enemy." He whistled sharply. The side door of the church kicked open. 2 of Creed's hired gunmen dragged a man in from the sunlight. It was Kohana. His hands were bound behind his back with raw hide. His face was bruised, blood trickling from a cut above his eye, but his head was high. He had been intercepted not at the spring, but watching the perimeter of the church, guarding Nora from the shadows. "We caught this one planting explosives behind the vestry." Creed lied smoothly, pointing a finger at Kohana. "He was going to blow us all to kingdom come while you prayed, and she—" He pointed at Nora. "She is the distraction." The crowd wavered. The sight of the Apache warrior, bruised and bound, triggered the deep-seated racial fear that lay just beneath the surface of the territory. "No!" Nora screamed, stepping between the mob and Kohana. "That is a lie. He is the only reason the water is still flowing." "Kill the savage!" someone shouted from the back, likely one of Creed's plants. "Get him out of here!" another yelled. The church erupted into chaos. Rourke lunged for Nora, grabbing her arm. Kohana, seeing Rourke touch her, exploded into motion. He dropped his shoulder and slammed into the gunman holding his right arm. sending the man crashing into a pew. With a roar, Kohana kicked backward, catching the second guard in the knee. "The canyon!" Kohana shouted to Nora, his voice cutting through the din. "Creed sent Miller to the canyon. The fuse!" Nora realized with a jolt of horror Kohana had been the decoy. Creed had brought him here to keep him away from the spring. Creed, seeing the brawl expand, did not stay to fight. He bolted for the sacristy door, knocking over the communion table. "He is going to the spring!" Nora yelled. She stomped hard on Rourke's instep as the deputy howled and let go. She grabbed the shotgun from May, who was busy swinging her heavy handbag at a hired gun, and threw it to the rancher nearest the door. "Stop them!" Kohana had broken free of the guards, though his hands were still bound. He ran to the window and threw himself through the glass, landing in the dirt outside. Nora scrambled after him through the side door. "Cut me loose!" Kohana demanded, backing up to her. Nora fumbled for the small knife in her boot. Her hands shook, but she sawed through the rawhide. The moment the bonds snapped, Kohana rubbed his wrists. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Try to stop me," Nora replied. They grabbed 2 horses from the hitching rail, Creed's own thoroughbreds. They didn't bother with stirrups. They just scrambled into the saddles and spurred the animals into a gallop. The ride to the canyon was a blur of wind and dust. Ahead of them, a trail of dust marked Creed's buggy, driven furiously by Miller. "They will blow the wall," Kohana yelled over the wind, "to hide the evidence and steal the flow." They reached the mouth of the canyon just as the buggy disappeared around the bend toward the spring. The air here was trapped, hot and still. Gunfire erupted from the rocks ahead. Miller had stopped the buggy and was firing a repeater rifle to pin them down. "Go high," Kohana commanded. "I will draw his fire." He didn't wait for her to argue. He kicked his horse, riding straight up the center of the wash, hanging off the side of the animal in the traditional Apache shield maneuver. Miller's shots kicked up sand around the horse's hooves. Nora hauled on the reins, forcing her mount up the steep scree slope to the left. She needed the high ground. She crested the ridge and looked down. The scene below was a tableau of disaster. The wooden crate of dynamite was wedged into the fissure of the rock wall. A long fuse snaked out across the sand. Silas Creed was there, crouching by the end of the fuse. A match flared in his cupped hands, but he wasn't looking at the fuse. He was looking at a small child, a rancher's boy, no more than 6 years old, who had been playing in the shade of the cottonwoods, oblivious to the war over his water. The boy stood frozen, staring at the man with the fire. Creed hesitated, not out of mercy, but out of calculation. If he blew the wall now, the rock slide would crush the boy. Witnesses were one thing. A dead white child was a hanging-off offense that no amount of money could fix. Then, Creed's face hardened. He dropped the match. The fuse hissed. A spark began to race toward the crate. "No!" Nora screamed. She didn't think so. She didn't calculate. She slid from her saddle and scrambled down the steep rock face, sliding on her backside, tearing her dress, disregarding the sharp shale slicing her palms. Creed turned, drawing a snub-nosed revolver. He fired at her. The bullet whined off the rock inches from her head. Below, Kohana had reached Miller. He leaped from his moving horse, tackling the driver. They rolled in the dust, a tangle of limbs and knives. Miller was strong, but Kohana was fighting for something more than a paycheck. He disarmed Miller with a brutal twist of the wrist and knocked him unconscious with the hilt of his knife. Kohana looked up. He saw the fuse burning. He saw Creed raising his gun to shoot Nora, who was sprinting across the sand toward the terrified child. Kohana threw his knife. It was a desperate throw, across 30 feet of open air. The blade didn't hit Creed. It wasn't meant to. It struck the hand holding the revolver, slicing across the knuckles. Creed screamed and dropped the gun. Nora reached the boy. She tackled him, shielding his small body with her own, rolling them both behind a large boulder just as the fuse reached the crate. But there was no earth-shattering explosion. Instead, there was a sharp pop, a fizzle, and a small puff of black smoke. The dynamite caps blew, but the main charge did not ignite. Kohana stood panting, his chest heaving. "Wet sand," he whispered. "I packed the crate with wet sand before I went to the church." He had known. He had prepared. Creed stared at the smoking crate, his face a mask of disbelief. He clutched his bleeding hand. He looked around for a weapon, for an escape, but there was only the canyon wall and the Apache warrior walking toward him. Kohana moved slowly. His eyes were black voids. He picked up Creed's fallen revolver from the sand. He cocked the hammer. "You tried to kill the water," Kohana said, his voice low and terrible. "You tried to kill the woman." Creed backed up until he hit the rock wall. "Now, wait," he stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "Wait, I can pay you. I can give you the deed. I can give you the whole damn canyon." Kohana raised the gun. The barrel was leveled directly at Creed's forehead. This was the moment. The vengeance for his sister. The vengeance for the lies. The world would be cleaner without Silas Creed. "Do it," Creed whispered, his eyes squeezing shut. "Prove you are what they say you are." "Kohana!" Nora's voice came from behind the boulder. She stood up, dusting the sand from the trembling boy. She didn't run to stop him. She just stood there, watching him. "Don't let him write your story either," she said. Kohana froze. He looked at Creed, a shivering, pathetic man in a dirty suit. Then he looked at Nora. She was bruised, bleeding, her hair wild, standing in the wreckage of a dress that would never be white again. She looked like a queen. He slowly lowered the hammer of the gun. "You are not worth the bullet," Kohana said. He stepped forward and pistol-whipped Creed across the jaw. Creed crumpled to the sand, unconscious. The sound of hoofbeats thundered down the canyon. It wasn't Rourke. It was May Hollis, leading a posse of angry ranchers. They pulled up in a cloud of dust, guns drawn, ready for war. They saw the scene: the Apache warrior standing over the defeated tycoon, the white woman holding the rancher's son, the dynamite that had failed to blow. May slid off her horse and walked over to Creed. She nudged him with her boot. "Well," she said, "looks like the meeting is adjourned." Later, as the sun began to set and the ranchers were tying Creed and Miller to their horses, Nora sat by the spring, washing the cut on her arm. Kohana came to stand beside her. He handed her a piece of paper he had pulled from Creed's inside pocket. It was a telegram. "Read it," he said. Nora unfolded the paper. It was addressed to Silas Creed. "She is carrying the ledger. Stop her at all costs. Stop, she is stubborn but breakable. Stop, funds transferred to your account. Stop, Arthur." Nora stared at the name. Arthur, her fiancé, the man who had told her she was too fragile for the world. He hadn't just broken the engagement. He had sold the information about her discovery to the very company she was trying to expose. He was the broker. She felt a strange lightness in her chest, the last thread binding her to the east, to the guilt, to the feeling of inadequacy. Snapped. "He said I was breakable," Nora said quietly. She took the telegram and held it over the small fire the ranchers had started. She watched the paper curl, turn black, and disappear into ash. "He was wrong," Kohana said. He reached out and brushed a smudge of soot from her cheek. Nora looked at the water bubbling from the earth, clear and relentless. She looked at the community of people, ranchers and miners, who were now looking at Kohana not with fear, but with a grudging respect. She had saved their son. He had saved their water. "Yes," Nora said, standing up and taking his hand. "He was very wrong." The dust from the canyon did not settle for 3 days. It hung in the air over Ocotillo Flats, a golden mist that served as a constant reminder of how close the town had come to dying of thirst. In the center of town, the machinery of justice, usually rusted shut in the territory, began to grind with a sudden, startling speed. The arrival of United States Marshal Davies, a man with a mustache like a push broom and eyes that had seen every kind of sin between the Mississippi and the Pacific, changed the atmosphere from lawless to strictly regimented. Silas Creed did not look like a tycoon as he was led out of the sheriff's office. He wore irons on his wrists and ankles. His linen suit was stained with the red dirt of the canyon and the darker stains of his own dried blood, where Kohana's knife had opened his hand. He walked with a limp, his head bowed, not in contrition, but in the sullen, furious silence of a predator who could not believe the trap had closed on him. Nora stood on the boardwalk outside the general store, watching him go. She did not feel the surge of triumph she had expected. She felt only a quiet, heavy relief, like setting down a load she had carried for 1,000 miles. Beside her, Deputy Rourke was being stripped of his badge. It was a public humiliation. The marshal ripped the tin star from Rourke's vest, taking a piece of the fabric with it. "You are lucky, Rourke," Marshal Davies said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "Miss Whitaker's ledger shows you took bribes, not blood money directly. If I could prove you knew about the dynamite, you would be swinging. As it is, you have 1 hour to clear out of the territory. If I see you south of the Colorado River again, I will shoot you on sight." Rourke looked at the crowd. He looked for support, for the men he had bought drinks for, the men whose disputes he had settled with a heavy hand. But the town turned its back. They had seen the water nearly vanish. They had seen the truth in Nora's map. Rourke spat in the dirt, mounted his horse, and rode north, a diminished figure disappearing into the heat shimmer. But as the dust of Rourke's departure settled, Nora noticed something else. The town was safe. Yes, the water was secure. Yes. But the eyes that turned toward her were not all friendly. Mrs. Gable, the banker's wife, walked past Nora. She paused, tightening her shawl. "You did a brave thing, Miss Whitaker," she said stiffly. "Saving the boy. We are grateful for that." "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," Nora said. "However," the woman continued, her voice dropping to a chilly whisper, "it does not change the fact that you have been cohabitating with the wild element. It sets a poor example for the young women of this parish. We hope you will have the decency to move on now that your business is concluded." She swept away before Nora could respond. Nora felt the sting of it, sharp and familiar. She looked across the street. A group of miners was leaning against the saloon wall. They nodded to her with respect, touching the brims of their hats. But when Kohana walked out of the livery stable down the block, leading his horse, their expressions hardened. One of them turned and spat on the ground. The water was saved, but the hate remained. The canyon wall was intact, but the wall between the races was as high as ever. "Do not listen to the old biddies," May Hollis said, stepping out of the store with a sack of flour on her shoulder. "They are just mad because you showed more spine in one afternoon than their husbands have shown in a lifetime. They want me to leave." "May," Nora said quietly. "They think I have disrupted the natural order." "The natural order was rot," May said firmly. "You just kicked the anthill. It takes time for the ants to calm down." Kohana felt the division more acutely than Nora. He had saved their children. He had saved their cattle, but he was still an Apache in a town that wanted to be white. He rode out to the edge of the reservation boundary, a place marked by a line of stones and the invisible pressure of treaties. He met with the elders of his band under the shade of a mesquite tree. His cousin, Chayton, a man with a face scarred by smallpox and a heart hardened by betrayal, looked at him with skepticism. "The white men celebrate," Chayton said, gesturing toward the distant smoke of the town chimneys. "They keep the water. And you, what do you keep, Kohana?" "I keep my word," Kohana replied. "And we keep the spring. The marshal has declared the canyon federal land. It cannot be owned. Our women can gather water there without fear of Creed's fences." "For now," Chayton said, "paper changes. The white man's ink fades." He looked at Kohana intensely. "And the woman, the one with hair like dried grass, you walk in her shadow." "She walks beside me," Kohana corrected, his voice sharp. "Not in front, not behind. She is one of them," Chayton spat. "She will take what she needs, your strength, your knowledge of the land, and then she will go back to her stone houses in the east. That is what they do. They consume." Kohana thought of Nora standing in the sand, her dress torn, stepping between him and a gun. He thought of her hand on his chest, feeling for a heartbeat, not a wallet. "She is not them," Kohana said, She came here carrying a burden of lies that were not hers. She burned them. She does not stay to take Chaitan. She stays to hold on. We shall see, Chaitan said, turning his horse. When the winter comes and the wind is cold, we shall see if her blood is thick enough for this land. Kohana watched them ride away. He was alone between two worlds. The town did not want him because he was Apache. His people doubted him because he trusted a white woman. But as he looked back at the boarding house, seeing the small light in the window, he knew he had found a third world one that existed only in the space between him and Nora. That evening, Nora sat in the parlor of the boarding house. Her trunk was packed. It sat by the door, looking exactly as it had the day she arrived. Marshal Davies had offered her safe passage on the morning stage to Santa Fe, and from there, a train ticket back to Boston. You have a reward coming, the marshal had said. Enough to set yourself up in a nice flat in the city. You could teach, you could forget this heat. It was the sensible choice. It was the choice Arthur would have expected her to make. It was the choice Mrs. Gable wanted her to make. Nora walked over to the trunk. She ran her hand over the battered leather. Inside were her corsets, her heavy wool dresses, the trappings of a life that felt like a costume she had outgrown. She opened the lid. She took out the ledger, the new one she had bought at the general store. She took out her inkwell. Then, she closed the trunk and dragged it not out the door, but back into the corner of the room. I am not going, she said to the empty room. May walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She didn't look surprised. I figured. The coffee is better here than in Boston anyway. It is terrible coffee. May... Nora smiled, her eyes misting. It tastes like mud and gun oil. Builds character, May grunted. So, if you are staying, you need to earn your keep. I can't pay you much, but the books are a mess, and my knees are too bad to scrub the upstairs floors. I have an idea, Nora said. She gestured to the large, empty room adjacent to the parlor, which May used for storage. We have space, and I have noticed I am not the only woman who comes through here alone. The widow carrying a baby who passed away last week. The girl running from a bad marriage in Tucson. May stopped wiping her hands. She looked at the room, then at Nora. A sanctuary, May asked. A station, Nora corrected. Not a charity. A place where they can work, like I did. Where they can learn to read a contract so they don't get cheated. Where they can learn to shoot if they have to. May smiled, and for the first time, her face looked soft. The Hollis and Whitaker station has a ring to it, but the church ladies will have a fit. They like their charity quiet and shameful, not loud and proud. Let them have a fit, Nora said. We will have the women. The next morning, Nora asked Kohana to hitch the wagon. She did not tell him where they were going, but he seemed to know. He drove them out of town, past the place where the ambush had happened, all the way to the ruins of the old relay station. The desert was reclaiming the adobe walls, but the gate, the rotting, crooked wooden gate that had swung in the wind the day Nora arrived, was still there. It lay in the dust now, torn from its hinges during the storm, or perhaps just finally giving up the ghost. This wood is seasoned, Kohana said, kicking the beam. Hard as iron, but it is ugly. It is not ugly, Nora said, grabbing one end of the heavy beam. It is a survivor. Help me lift it. They loaded the pieces of the gate into the wagon. It was heavy, brutal work under the sun. Splinters dug into Nora's hands, but she did not complain. This gate had marked the boundary of her fear. Now, it would mark the boundary of her home. They drove back to the boarding house in silence, a comfortable silence that spoke of shared purpose. In the yard, under the shade of the cottonwood tree, they began to work. Kohana used his knife and a plane borrowed from the blacksmith to strip away the rot. Nora sanded the wood until the grain a deep, rich red like the canyon rocks shone through. They worked side by side, their shoulders brushing, their movements synchronized. He cut the joints. She hammered the nails. It was a reconstruction. They were taking something that had been a symbol of abandonment and turning it into a symbol of welcome. As the sun began to dip low, casting long purple shadows across the yard, they hung the new gate at the entrance to May's property. It was sturdy. It swung smoothly on new iron hinges, opening inward toward the house. Nora stood back, wiping sweat from her forehead with her forearm. She wore a simple calico dress now, practical and unrestrictive. Her face was brown from the sun, and there were fine lines of laughter and strain around her eyes that hadn't been there a month ago. "It is a good gate," Kohana said. He was leaning against the post, watching her. "It needs a latch," Nora said. "No," Kohana disagreed. "A latch keeps people out, or keep them in. Leave it free." Nora looked at him. He was still wearing his moccasins, his turquoise beads, his knife. He had not changed to fit the town, and she realized, with a sudden clarity, that she didn't want him to. "You are right," she said. "No latch." She walked over to him. They were in full view of the street. Anyone could see them, the spinster bookkeeper and the Apache scout. "My cousin says you will leave when the winter comes," Kohana said quietly. "He says the cold will drive you back to the stone houses." "Tell your cousin," Nora said, reaching out to take his hand, her rough palm against his, "that I have bought a winter coat, and I have bought a share in this house." Kohana looked at their joined hands. The contrast of skin was stark, but the grip was equal. "He also says," Kohana continued, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, "that a white woman cannot cook venison without burning it." Nora laughed, a sound that startled a sleeping dog on the porch. "Well, on that point, he might be right. You will have to teach me." "I will teach you," Kohana promised. "And you will teach me how to read the federal treaties so I can tell the marshal when he is lying." "It is a deal," Nora said. The sun touched the horizon, turning the sky into a blaze of glory. The gate stood open. Just then, a figure appeared down the road. It was a woman, walking alone, carrying a carpet bag that looked heavy. She was dusty and looked exhausted, her steps faltering as she neared the town. She saw the white boarding house. She saw the woman and the warrior standing by the gate. She hesitated, fear evident in her posture. Nora did not wait. She stepped away from Kohana, but not away from his support. She walked to the open gate and stepped through it, out onto the road. "Good evening," Nora called out, her voice clear and welcoming. "You look like you have traveled a long way. We have water, and we have a place to rest." The woman looked at Nora, then at the open gate. She slumped slightly, the tension leaving her shoulders. I don't have much money." "We didn't ask for money," Nora said. "Come inside." Nora guided the stranger through the gate. As they passed Kohana, he nodded to the woman a respectful, silent greeting. The woman looked surprised, then nodded back. Nora looked at Kohana over her shoulder. His eyes were warm. He was not leaving. He was standing guard, not against the world, but for it. She had found her place. She had not conquered the West. She had let the West strip away everything that wasn't true, until only the woman, the work, and the love remained. And that, she decided as she led the stranger up the steps to the life she had chosen, was enough. The gate swung gently in the evening breeze, neither open nor closed, but breathing with the rhythm of the desert. Time moved differently in the Arizona Territory once the gun smoke cleared. It no longer moved in the frantic, jagged bursts of survival, nor did it drag with the suffocating weight of waiting for a disaster. Instead, it settled into a rhythm, steady and strong, like the pulse of the seasons or the flow of the water in the canyon. 2 months had passed since the incident at Painted Rock Spring. The intense heat of late summer had broken, giving way to the crisp, golden light of autumn. The cottonwood trees in the wash were turning a brilliant yellow, standing like torches against the deep red of the canyon walls. At the newly christened Hollis and Whitaker Station, the morning began not with fear, but with the sound of a bell. Nora Whitaker stood at the front of the main parlor, which had been converted into a makeshift schoolroom during the daylight hours. She wore a dress of dark blue wool, practical and warm, with chalk dust on her sleeve. In front of her sat 12 children. Some were the sons and daughters of the local ranchers who had stood with her in the church. 2 were from the mining camp, and 1, sitting quietly in the back with eyes that missed nothing, was an Apache boy named Halion, Chayton's nephew. "The word is community," Nora said, writing it on the slate board in a clear, looping script. "It comes from Latin. It means shared in common." She turned to the class. "It does not mean everyone is the same. It means everyone has a part, like the bricks in a wall. If one brick says, 'I am better than the rest,' and leaves, the wall falls." She looked out the window. Through the glass, she could see the yard. The rotting fence was gone. The new gate stood sturdy and open, and beyond it, riding toward the canyon, was a group of men. They were an unlikely crew. There was Old Man Galloway on his plow horse. There were 2 miners with pickaxes, and leading them, riding tall on his paint horse with a coil of wire over his shoulder, was Kohana. They were not riding to war. They were riding to work. Kohana did not look back at the house, but Nora knew he felt her gaze. They had not spoken of marriage. To speak of it seemed small, a convention of the world they were leaving behind. In Boston, marriage was a contract of property and social standing. Here, what they had was a daily renewal of a choice. He chose to stay. She chose to stay. That was stronger than any paper signed by a person. Later that afternoon, Nora rode out to the canyon with a basket of food. The work was well underway. Under Kohana's direction, the men were building a drift fence not to block the water, but to guide the cattle to a trough system that would keep the spring itself clean and unpolluted. It was a marvel of engineering and diplomacy. The ranchers brought the tools. The Apaches showed them where the flash floods ran so they would not build in a place that would be washed away in the spring. Nora dismounted and walked to where Kohana was setting a cedar post. He was stripped to the waist, his bronze skin shining with sweat. He stopped hammering when he saw her. He wiped his forehead with his forearm and took the canteen she offered. "The post is straight," Nora observed, checking the line. "The earth accepted it," Kohana said. He took a long drink of water. "Galloway talks too much, but he works hard. He says the same about you." Nora smiled. "He says you are a taskmaster." "The water does not care if we are tired," Kohana replied. Capping the canteen, he looked at her then. The sun was dipping low, casting that particular heart-aching light that turns the desert into a painting. The tension that used to define his posture, the constant readiness for a bullet, had softened. It was not gone, for a warrior never truly sleeps, but it had changed into a protective watchfulness. "Dr. Thomas came by the station today," Nora said softly. "He brought the mail." Kohana stiffened slightly. Mail usually meant trouble from the government. "And the federal judge in Santa Fe has issued a ruling," Nora said. She stepped closer to him. "The Painted Rock Spring is designated as a public resource vital to the territory. The expansion project is suspended indefinitely pending a full environmental review. And the town of Ocotillo Flats has been granted a provisional charter for self-governance, separate from the railroad's jurisdiction." Kohana let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. He looked at the spring, bubbling clear and strong from the rock. "Paper," he said, but this time, the word did not carry a curse. "Paper," Nora agreed, "but paper backed by the people who live here. It is a start. Kohana, it is not perfect. There will be other men like Creed. There will be other fights. But for now, the water is ours." Kohana dropped the hammer. He stepped over the line of the fence he was building. He stood directly in front of her, ignoring the ranchers who were pretending not to watch from 50 yards away. He reached out and took her hand, the hand that used to hold a pen and now held the reins of a horse and the handle of a water pump. He placed her hand on his chest, directly over his heart. The beat was strong, steady. Thump, 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 thump. It was the same rhythm she had felt that night in the canyon when she was terrified and lost. But now, it wasn't a lifeline she was clinging to in a storm. It was the foundation of the house she had chosen to build. She looked up into his dark eyes. She didn't ask, "Where should I begin?" She knew where she was. She was exactly where she belonged. She simply listened to the rhythm. It was a vow without words. It said, "I am here. I am real. I am yours. And you are mine. And we are of this land." "It is a good sound," Nora whispered. "It beats for the water," Kohana said, his voice rough with emotion. "And for the woman who saved it." They stood there for a long moment, the silence between them filled with everything that didn't need to be said. Then, Kohana picked up his hammer. There was still a fence to build, and Nora picked up her basket. There were still children to teach. 2 weeks later, as the first chill of winter began to creep into the night air, a stagecoach pulled up to the Hollis and Whitaker station. It was late, past 8 o'clock. The town was quiet. The gate, the beautiful, unlatched gate made of seasoned wood, swung gently in the wind. Nora was sitting on the porch, mending a quilt. May was inside, arguing with the stove. Kohana was carving a toy horse for Hallian by the firelight. The stagecoach driver tossed a trunk onto the dust. It landed with a heavy thud. Then, a passenger stepped down. She was young, perhaps 20. She wore a dress that was too thin for the frontier and a hat that had been fashionable in Philadelphia a year ago. She looked exhausted, dusty, and terrified. She clutched a small, battered valise to her chest as if it contained the crown jewels. In her other hand, she held a torn piece of newspaper with an advertisement for a governess position that Nora knew for a fact didn't exist anymore. The girl looked at the vast, empty darkness of the desert. She looked at the strange, rambling house with its lighted windows. She looked ready to cry, or to run, or to faint. Nora set down her quilt. She stood up. She remembered the feeling, the crushing weight of being alone, the fear that the world was a mouth waiting to swallow you whole. She remembered the rotting gate that had marked the end of her hope, and how it felt to be looked at as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. Nora walked down the steps. She walked across the yard. Kohana stood up and moved to the doorway, his presence a silent reassurance behind her. Nora reached the gate. She pushed it open wider, ensuring it wouldn't creak or hesitate. The girl flinched as Nora approached. I was told this was a boarding house," the girl stammered. "But the driver said, he said it was run by—" She looked past Nora to the Apache warrior in the doorway. "It is run by a family," Nora said firmly. "Of a sort." Nora looked at the trunk. It was heavy, just like hers had been. She looked at the girl's hands, soft, uncalloused, trembling. "You are looking for a place to belong," Nora said. It wasn't a question. The girl's lip quivered. "I don't have anywhere else to go. I spent my last dollar on the ticket." Nora smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had walked through the fire and come out carrying water. "Then you have come to the right place," Nora said. "Leave the trunk. The men will get it. You come inside. The coffee is terrible, but the stew is warm." "Who are you?" the girl asked, wiping dust from her eyes. "I am Nora," she replied, "and I used to be exactly where you are standing." She reached out her hand. The girl hesitated, then took it. Nora pulled her gently through the gate, across the threshold from the wild, indifferent dark into the circle of light spilling from the house. Behind them, the sun had long since set, leaving a stain of deep, abiding purple on the horizon. The stars were coming out, sharp and cold and beautiful. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the spring in the canyon bubbled on, a silver thread in the darkness. Nora looked back at Kohana. He nodded. She understood then that freedom was not about having no ties. Freedom was not about running away from the expectations of others. Freedom was the ability to choose which chains you would wear and which gate you would stand guard over. She had chosen hers. She had chosen the dust, the water, the work, and the man. "Come on," Nora said to the girl, and to herself. "Let's go home." She closed the door against the cold. but she left the gate unlatched. It would always be unlatched, anywhere close to forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Nora and Kohana as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from and what you thought of the ending. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you want to hear more tales from the frontier, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. And if you really want to support the channel, please press the hype button. It helps these stories get heard by more people. Thank you for your time, and I will see you on the next trail.